everyone, my name is Robin. I'm the owner of kittyandbean.com, and I've decided to do a quick knitting tutorial to teach my unique way of knitting. So I use something called a magic loop method, which means you use a really long cabled needle and you kind of omit the need for double pointed needles and straight needles. So it's a little more cost effective, especially if you're starting up knitting. It can be a little tricky at the start, but in the end I find it's quite a bit easier, simpler at least. And then I do something called a long tail cast on as well for all of my work. So I'll show you guys that it's a little different than your regular cast on, but it gives a nice, neat, but stretchy border to all your work. So let's get started. Bear with me while I set up. Okay, so first we'll start with our cabled needles. So the most important thing when you're doing magic loop is to invest in a half decent pair of cabled needles. You want to get the longest cable you can and make sure it's quite flexible, pliable stuff. The stiffer the cable, the more difficult it'll be. So for your sanity's sake, get a nice soft pair of cabled needles. So that's my cable. Here's my yarn. So first thing you want to do is start with your slip knot. We can run through a quick how to do a slip knot. So I take my yarn in my hand just like so. You want to just stick out 2 fingers and hold it in position with your thumb, and then the yarn goes up, over, you come back down the bottom. Now you're going to cross over to that side, and you're not going to go all the way down this time. You're going to spread your fingers slightly, and through the back of the yarn you're going to poke the yarn through the hole in your fingers that you've created. Okay, so just like that. Now once you've got this loop here, you just drop your fingers and then pull on your yarn, and there's your slip knot. So then you toss you got to figure out which one to pull to tighten it, and then you tighten it on your needles. So there we are. That's our very first, that can count as stitch 1. Okay, so because this is chunky yarn and pretty big needles, we're not going to cast on too many. So I'd say, I don't know, 40, maybe 60. We'll see. I'm winging it here. Okay, so for long tail cast on, hand positioning is important. So with this finger you're going to hold your stitch onto here because it's going to want to come off for the first couple. Then you take your hand just like you were doing your slip knot, and with your bottom 2 fingers, or I guess bottom 3 even, you're going to hold both pieces of yarn, and that's kind of your tension. Then you take your top finger, put 1 piece of yarn and hold it up, take your thumb and hold the yarn down. So it's kind of being held in a V. So you got this finger holding this one, top and bottom, and they're nice and tight because your fingers are holding it in position. So, oh, see, it's slipping off of here. Okay, so the first part of your long tail cast on is going to be grabbing the bottom. It always goes bottom, top, on, okay? So bottom means you're going to go around. So I'm kind of twisting my hand as I do this. Twist your hand, grab this bottom piece, so kind of scratch the outside edge of your thumb with the tip of the needle, and it should grab this piece of yarn here. Now we still have this yarn coming over our finger. You want to grab that piece and pull it through the hole you just made. Now that looks kind of like a hot mess, but if you just pull down on your thumb, it tightens up into a beautiful stitch. So I'll try maybe further back from the camera and see if it doesn't make more sense. So we're going to go bottom, okay, top, pull it through the hole, hang on, this is like playing video games, and then tighten. Okay, so bottom, top through that hole, tighten. Okay, so I have 4. They don't need to be crazy tight. They should be able to slide around. Okay, let's try one more. Bottom, bottom, top, tighten. And once you get going, you get really fast at it. It's mostly in the thumb. I don't tend to move my top finger very much. So thumb, grab that yarn that's hanging out by your finger and then pull with my thumb. If it's too loose, you'll find it's hard to kind of pick stuff up because it's too saggy. See, like there. That's about as loose as I can do it. All right. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11. All right. So you get the idea. So instead of me knitting everything on, I'll just keep going. So magic loop is where you're going to join in the round so there's no seaming something together. So what you want to do is pull your stitches kind of down onto the cable part. You fold your cable in half. Kind of like that. And then your stitches divide. Now, if you have an even cast on of stitches, make sure you divide your stitches evenly. If you're doing some kind of pattern where there's cabling or Fair Isle work, make sure you keep in mind the number of stitches in that set so you're not switching needles in the middle of your set. So after you fold your cable needle and divide your stitches, you want to push your stitches back up onto your needles. So I like to have, I think what you're supposed to have is your yarn on the back needle, so your tails are on the back needle, kind of where the end of, or I guess this was the start of our cast on, is on the front needle. Okay, so you got your 2 needles there. Now for knitting, you always want to start behind, so take your tails, flip them over the tip of your needle so you're not twisting anything. Now, making sure that everything's nice and flowing well, so it goes up and down with no weird knots or twists in it. If you're sure about that, then you pull this needle out and we're going to join onto here. Okay, so I find with a join, the best way to get a tight join is to knit into the back of the stitch, not the front. So what that means is knitting into the front of a stitch is going in this way, like you'd be knitting regularly. Knitting into the back of the stitch means going in back here. But your yarn is still being held behind you, or behind the needle. So it's not like a purl, it's like a knit. So then you go, and I like to knit my tail and my active stitch for the first one, okay? And then you drop down to just your active yarn and leave your tail. And that just makes a nice tight join. Okay, so once you do that, then you can start knitting normally. I tend to be a very tight knitter, and so these nice big needles, I find what they force me to do is keep my work more loose and pliable and have a little bit more, I guess, softness or flowiness to it. Okay, so this is the last stitch on that side. So what Magic Loop method makes you do is you then turn your needle just like you would if you're knitting on straight needles. So flip it over, and then you pick up the other side. Okay, so then push your stitches onto the needle you just picked up. That's our tail. It's kind of annoying. All right, so because we're still knitting, you don't want to just drag your yarn over. You want to make sure it's behind your work. Okay, and then because we're not doing a join, this is just kind of continuing on as if we're doing basically two straight needles that are connected with this lovely little cable. So then you make sure it's tight enough so that you're not going to have this big baggy joint where your magic loop is happening. Make sure it's relatively snug for that first stitch, and then just knit on as you would normally. I've realized I'm a continental knitter. That's just because those are the YouTube videos I watch to teach myself to knit. It's also called picking. I find trying to hold the yarn in my other hand to be incredibly frustrating. I don't know if it's just not compatible with magic loop or if I just can't learn that way. I've heard that the other way is called speed knitting though, because it's way faster. So I really wish I could force myself to do it that way. Okay, get the tail out of my way. So again, I turned my work once I got to the end, and you pull the front side through. Now remember, we have 2 pieces of yarn for that first stitch because it has the tail included in it. See, and if you over tighten, it'll be a little bit trickier to slide it on, but it'll go. Over tightening is what I seem to do best. Okay, and then you just keep going around and around and around. So the other thing I really like about this magic loop method is you can make giant projects, you can make tiny projects, and you don't need a different set of needles. It's all the same thing. So again, you pull your back one through, make sure your yarn was flipped behind. Otherwise, you're going to have tangles and loops and weirdness going on, and it'll get confusing. Hopefully this is not too shaky or anything like that. I'm trying to go slow. When you're just knitting around like this, it's really easy to just zone out and you get in a bit of a rhythm. Alright, coming to the end again here. Alright, so here we are at the end. So my front needle I'm not using anymore, everything's cast onto my back needle, so then I turn my work and I pull this loop through. So you can see the yarn never uses this back half, it never touches it. For my cowl pattern that I wrote, I think I said cast on something like 72, and with that it actually was getting near the end. So sometimes if it's something that's taking up nearly your full length of cable, you'll want to place a marker at the beginning of your work just so you know where each round is starting. But with magic loop, I find that each round is marked because the start of your row is the side where your tail is, and the other side is your midpoint, your halfway point. So if your yarn never comes to that midpoint of the loop, so you always have that loop present, you have a midpoint marker there, and then the tail is your beginning of your circle. So I've never even attempted double point needle knitting. I use this for everything. So you can see it's starting to come together. This actually would be a really good size for a mitten, a little bracelet. Anyway, so you can see those cast on stitches look really nice and tidy and neat, and that's that long tail cast on at work there. So hopefully this was useful. Basically, I just did this little sample piece to show you guys how magic loop knitting works. But all that's different between this and my pattern is adding in a purl stitch and casting on more stitches. And that's about it. So hopefully you guys found this useful. Ciao!